Here we go.
Alright, so I'm going to get into the spoiler review of The Flash. So, again, if you haven't seen The Flash, you may want to stop watching or watch it later when you watched it. Or if you don't care, then that's cool too. But I am going to do a spoiler review right now of The Flash. So last week I did do the non-spoiler review of the film. And that one's on my channel, so check that one out if you don't want any spoilers. But for this one, it's like there's a lot of things going on with this movie that I wanted to talk in my non-spoiler review, but I couldn't because there were spoilers and everything. But I was like, let's do an actual spoiler review of this movie and talk about the details, because there's a lot of shit going on in this movie. Overall, I did like the movie. Overall, it was a lot of fun, and I give it an A-. And after watching it the second time, I'll stick to the A-. I know a lot of people had a lot of problems with mainly the CGI, which I'm going to talk about in just a bit here. So let's begin again. So again, this is the spoiler section here. So I'm going to talk about the positives like I usually do here. So the first thing here is Sasha Calle, who plays Supergirl. And so they didn't go with Henry Cavill because there's been issues with, I don't know exactly what the details are, but, Henry Cavill hasn't been in a lot of these DC movies. And while they show the back of Henry Cavill's Superman in The Flash, but he's like on a TV and it's like a news segment. He's like helping saving a town about a volcano or something, so you can see like the back of him, but you can't actually see Henry Cavill. But you know that it's him. But they decided to go this route. They got Supergirl. So the universe that we get into in this movie, they don't have the Henry Cavill Superman. So they have her, Supergirl, and she was cool in it. The actress was good. She was, like I mentioned last time, she's a badass. She does a lot of cool scenes, a lot of sequences, and she's not in the movie much, but the scenes that she's in, she was pretty cool. And if they somehow bring her back, I'll be totally okay with that. So she was definitely a positive when it comes to Kara Zor-El, Supergirl, which again played by Sasha Calle. And the obvious one here, and this is something that I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, is of course the Batman. Particularly here in this image we have Keaton's. So obviously Michael Keaton's appearance in the film. And now Michael Keaton is not my favorite Batman. I mentioned this before too in another stream that I made I ranked all the Batman actors. And it was a collective. It wasn't just my opinion, but it was other members of the movie canon. And Michael Keaton, I don't think he was in the top 3 actually. But I mean, I like Michael Keaton. He's just not my favorite one, but I do like seeing him again. I did like that they announced that Michael Keaton was returning for this, and it would make sense because we were all talking about, this was going to be some version of Flashpoint, some kind of multiverse thing going on. And okay, it could probably work, and I think it did work. So Michael Keaton being in this as Batman Bruce Wayne, I think it worked very, very well. If Michael Keaton has always been your Batman, your Bruce Wayne, then this is definitely a movie for you because he's in it quite a bit. Obviously, he's not the lead, but he's more in it than Supergirl is. And he's definitely more than just a little cameo. Which I'll talk about the cameos in just a bit here in this spoiler review. But he was cool. It was nice seeing him an older Bruce Wayne and just seeing him, all the fighting sequences that he did in the movie and the suits, and we see the Batmobile again from the 90s, 89, 92. So it was cool to see all that. And then he does a very cool explanation of the multiverse and the timelines with spaghetti. which worked very, very well. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, the way that he does it, and it works with the story. So that was good. And so that was Keaton in particular. Now, going to the Affleck portion of this. Now, I mentioned this in the non-spoiler review that I loved the Batman sequence with Affleck, the Bat Cycle sequence in particular. That's like the main Batman scene that we have with Affleck. Now, Affleck is in other scenes in the movie, but he's not as Batman. He's as Bruce Wayne or whatever. So I like the scene in the movie, and it was just a very cool action sequence. And as I mentioned earlier too in a stream, when it comes to figures, I'm really debating if I want to get this Batman Affleck hot toy and the Bat Cycle, except the faceplate of Affleck, the likeness is not there, so that's why I haven't pulled the trigger on that, because it doesn't really look like Affleck that much. It looks like it's stunt double. But this sequence was very, very cool. Again, if you're just a general Batman fan, if you're a big Affleck fan, and you've seen this movie, I'm sure you really, really liked it. And if you haven't seen this, and you don't care about spoilers, because again, this is a spoiler review, I think you will like this sequence here. So I did like Affleck as the Batman, or Batman. So this is part of the positives here. Okay, so again, this is a spoiler review. I'm just going to mention this again, just so in case some of you guys don't know that this is a spoiler review section or segments of The Flash. Right now, I'm about to get into the cameos of the film, so that's what I'm getting on the screen right now, real quick here. So we're gonna get into some very heavy spoilers, and there's gonna be graphics, there's gonna be images. So even if you can't hear me, you'll see stuff that is spoilery. Okay, so just warning you guys now. Okay, so I was very surprised by a few things, cameos, and there's the whole debate, the whole question about fan service. Okay, so I think a lot of us do like fan service. I think a lot of us do enjoy and appreciate the fan service. We do want to see certain characters that we've seen in the past, growing up. And I think a lot of us do like that. So there's been some information or some stuff out there that people are always complaining about. This is just fan service. This is just fan service. Like, okay, yeah. But I mean, if it makes sense, if it makes sense in the story, then why not? Why wouldn't you want to see a character that you did like or that you've seen in the past? Why wouldn't you want to see them again if you're able to? But mainly, does it make sense? And I would argue that yes, it does make sense. All these cameos that we have, or at least most of them, that are in this movie. So we have George Clooney. So George Clooney comes in as Bruce Wayne. So he appears at the very end. It's like the very last scene of the movie. And, at that point, there was a bunch of things going on with the Flash, with the Dark Flash. He was trying to get into all these multiverses, all these different timelines to correct and fix things. And in the process of that, even though the older, or the main Barry Allen does come in and fix things, obviously it didn't fix absolutely everything, because when Barry Allen gets a call after there was the victory with the case with the father, with the murder case of the mother, so he gets a call and it says Bruce Wayne, and then we see the car pulling up at the building of the court building, and it's the same car that Bruce Wayne, the Affleck one, was driving earlier in the film. So it's okay, so he's driving the same car, so it's like it's probably gonna be, we expect Ben Affleck there, and then all of a sudden Bruce Wayne pops up, but is actually George Clooney. So the George Clooney from the Batman and Robin movies, so he popped up there. So that was kind of surprising. I was like, oh shit, they actually brought in George Clooney for this. It was surprising to me, because I know he's talked shit about, playing the character in the past. He's apologized for playing the character and so forth. So it was like, oh, so they actually, I don't know if they needed convincing. I don't think they necessarily need to convince George Clooney to come back. Maybe there's a bit of nostalgia for him. Here's my chance to be Batman again in this particular case. which made sense. It's just a little cameo. He's not even wearing the suit. It's just Bruce Wayne. So that was surprising, and I like that. I mean, that was straight up fan service, but I mean, it works with the story. What they're gonna do with it in the moving forward, have no idea, because when it comes to the DC universe, it looks like they did reboot certain things when it comes to some of the characters, but not all of them. Right? So I don't necessarily think that in this universe that we're gonna have George Clooney as Batman moving forward. I don't think that's the case at all. But there's definitely some questions there. But I thought that was interesting, and it was funny that he popped up. The other thing here is we have Nick Cage as Superman from the canceled Superman Lives movie that Tim Burton was working on back in the 90s. I think that's when Nicolas Cage was like working on movies like Con Air and Face Off. I think it was during that time frame. So they were actually very close to starting to film this movie, and it was canceled, and I think it was related to like budget issues. I guess it was ballooning big time, and they were just like, no, we can't do this. And they even did like a little a test screening, or not test screening, like Nicolas Cage tried on the suit, and there's footage of it. There's even a documentary out there. I think it's called The Death of Superman Lives. I think it talk about that story, about that canceled movie. So that was completely shocking to me. I was really surprised about this when he popped up in the movie. It's very, very brief. Now it looks very CGI. Now the graphics that you see here, they look really, really bad, because I was trying to find a decent image, a decent graphic that showed Nicolas Cage as Superman, and I think this is actually from The Flash. That little small section there. But the quality is really, really bad. But that's the only one that I was able to use. But that's Nicolas Cage as Superman, and I guess there was a part of the script regarding this movie that he was going to fight some giant, like mechanical spider or something that you see in the movie. So I guess that was part of the script. So they're kind of like including it. And then the other thing is that a lot of these sequences, when it comes to some of these cameos, not the George Clooney one, but this one, and then some other ones that I'm going to mention, they look very CGI-ish. And I know some of them were, because some of those actors are not alive anymore. But for this particular one, it looked very, very CGI-like. And then I'll talk about that in the negative section. But apparently, it looks like Nicolas Cage actually did show up, and he actually did film his scenes for this. And that's kind of goes back to the whole thing about Andy Muschietti mentioned something that, you know, the CGI, the visual effects are supposed to be like this. They are supposed to be kind of weird looking. And then I'll talk about that in the negative section. But when it comes to this particular scene, it looks like Nicolas Cage did show up and record his scene. Another one here, again, another cameo. So we have Helen Slater, who played a Supergirl in the 80s. I think her movie came out in 84. I remember watching this movie as a kid, and I did like this movie, Supergirl, and then I forgot about the movie for like years, but I actually did like Supergirl, and she was in this, so that was her appearance. And again, she looked very CGI like, but apparently she also showed up and filmed her scene. So again, we'll get into the CGI stuff in just a bit here, but Christopher Reeves, he pops up. CGI, that one obviously had to be CGI, or de-aging or whatever. Obviously it wasn't Christopher Reeves, because he's been dead for years. I think like almost 2 decades now, probably. So he pops up. So that was cool to see, you know, both of them here. First Christopher Reeves pops up, and then Helen Slater, Supergirl, pops up shortly after that. So that was very cool, and you know, the experience, the reaction from the audience, you know, people loved it, especially in this pre-screening one. They seemed like there was a lot more DC fans there, so the reaction was more with the pre-screening when they popped up. That was pretty cool. Okay, the other thing is George Reeves. So he pops up very briefly. This is again in the same sequence, in that little section where Barry Allen or the Flash, they're in their like the little bubble about jumping into timelines or multiverses or whatever, and then you start seeing a bunch of things that is changing, things in the background, and then you see these characters, these different versions, variations of Superman, Batman, Adam West. At one point, I think I saw was there very briefly, and then this guy shows up, George Reeves, who was the actor who portrayed Superman in a TV series. I think it was in the 50s. I want to say it's in the 50s. Might be 60s, but he portrayed Superman, and they showed him real quick, and I was like, oh, that's interesting that they actually show him here. That's part of its own universe. And then what I found interesting, considering especially since we have Ben Affleck, who is actually in this movie as Batman. Ben Affleck played George Reeves, so he played him. Ben Affleck played George Reeves in a movie called Hollywoodland that came out in 2006. So I thought that was kind of interesting, at least for me, that they brought him up. George Reeves did. Ben Affleck Superman, they didn't obviously show him in the movie, but I found that interesting. So yeah, so that was so that's the positives, positive things about the Flash in this spoiler review of the movie. Now I'm gonna get into the negatives. So here we are, the negatives again. If you're just joining here, this is a spoiler review of the Flash. Okay, so this scene right here, this is the opening sequence. So we have the opening sequence here with the babies. So, the babies, they're falling off the hospital, and he's out there to save the day by collecting all of them and so forth. And there's this big CGI sequence regarding this. Now, when I first saw this movie in the pre-screening, the visual effects for this particular scene with the babies, with the infants, looked very, very bad. It looked very incomplete. It looked embarrassingly bad. And my thought process was like, okay, well, maybe they're showing a sequence of the scene that is not complete for the pre-screen, and then they'll fix it and they'll show it when the movie is actually ready to be released. So that's what I was thinking that might be the case. So I saw it again for a second time, and the CGI is still bad. So it's still the same now. I don't know, because I watched the pre-screen as IMAX, and the screen was larger, so I noticed that there was more poor CGI babies than I would a regular like Dolby screen. Or maybe they just cut little parts of it so that we wouldn't see that many bad babies or bad CGI babies. But I feel like there was a lot more bad CGI, like even more so in the pre-screen. I could be wrong, but I just felt like it was a longer sequence like that. But Andy Muschietti, the director of The Flash, does talk about the effects. So I'm trying to get the part where he is... starts talking about that here, so hold on a moment. Okay, so it says in an instant, so I'm reading this in an article here. So in an instant interview with IO9, the Flash director Andy Muschietti said he is well aware these divisive visual effects look weird to moviegoers. Why? Apparently that was exactly his intention. So Muschietti writes here, the idea, of course, is we are in the perspective of the Flash. Everything is distorted in terms of lights and textures. We enter this water world, in quotation marks, which is basically being in Barry's POV. It was part of the design. So if it looks a little weird to you, that was intended. The director is going to be sticking with Warner Brothers and DC Studios for the foreseeable future. As I mentioned earlier, he's going to be directing the Brave and the Bold film. Okay, so I mean, I'm not sure if I really fully believe this or if it makes sense, because my thing is, when it comes to DC movies, DC films have not been that successful with most people. I didn't hate most of the DC movies. There were a few that I actually did like. DC Universe movies, DCU movies. And when it comes to the CGI, I think, especially when it comes to like this movie here, when it's like a later DCU movie or whatever, I think that they should have not tested this out with visual effects that are supposed to look weird. They're supposed to look bad. It's like, okay, well, a lot of people are already not liking a lot of DC movies as it is, and now you're going to add a sequence and visual effects that are questionable, or even more than questionable. They're like really, really, really bad. And it's like, why would you want to add that on purpose? It's like, what would you give them more, especially to the people who are like criticizing DC movies? Like, why would you give them more fuel to that fire, right? So why would you just give them even more reason to complain about the DC universe? It's like most people. I mean, I'm not sure like why would they go this route. I know they said that it's supposed to be the perspective of the Flash, but most of us don't know about that. I mean, when I first saw it, I was like, I'm not sure. It's like, is this supposed to be like this? So they're just not done with it? Or is it supposed to be because he's so fast that this is the way that it looks? I mean, it looks, I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that. And I don't think it was a good idea to have used that CGI if that was for real the reason. That it was just the perspective of the Flash. That's how he sees it. And we look at it like it's weird looking. To me, it's like you try to make the best movie that you can as like visual effects, story, and everything. Don't give other people the ability to criticize the movie for things that you didn't need to. It's like you didn't need to add weird looking special effects if you didn't need to, because some of the other effects were good. I did like some of the other effects, so that was something I thought was kind of odd. So that was the sequence there. Now, still going back to the visual effects, at the end, when I was talking about the cameos, and just in general, when the Flash is running and he's jumping into timelines or whatever, multiverses, he's in like a little like realm, little bubble realm, if you want to call it. And in the background, you see like what's going on, like people in his life, his parents, him as a child, and they were all like CGI. So they're all CGI. They could have had the actual actors play those scenes, right? But they decided to go CGI with those, so they look a little weird. And again, maybe it has something to do with the whole thing that Muschietti said, that's his perspective as the Flash. They're supposed to look like this. And I mean, I kind of had my own theory as to why it looked like that for those sequences, not so much the baby ones, but the timeline sequences. Because to me, it's like, okay, especially since we see all the cameos, because a lot of the cameos had people that are not alive, like George Reeves, Christopher Reeves, Adam West, all those, they're not alive. So maybe they wanted to include them to be in that sequence, and the best thing is to have them CGI, so let's just have everything else be CGI, so it's not jarring at that point. You know what I mean? It's like that the mother and the father in the timeline, they were CGI, so then when Adam West and George Reeves and Christopher Reeves pop up, that CGI, that's not really jarring. It's not like, what, all of a sudden they're CGI and it looks really, really bad. So that was my thought, that's why they did that. And that's what I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, that I was thinking that part was intentional. I think that was part intentional. And then obviously they still had Nicolas Cage show up and actually film his scene apparently. So they it still kind of CGI'd it a bit, or de-aged it a bit. And then obviously, Helen Slater, who plays Supergirl, apparently she showed up, like I mentioned earlier, and she's all CGI'd. So that's what I want to say about the CGI stuff. And there was a couple scenes that I noticed that you can tell that when it comes to, the twin effect, there's the older Balan, the younger Balan, Barry Allen, I should say, Barry Allen. There's a couple scenes where you can see Ezra Miller's face, and you look, it's like very CGI, like it looks very fake. But it's like those particular shots were individual shots. I can understand that there's a shot that has both of them, the younger and the older Balan, Allen. I don't know, I keep saying Balan. Barry Allen. So you see the older and the younger one in one shot. And I guess I could understand why they CGI'd one of the Ezra Millers in one of the Flash or Barry Allen faces. But it looks like they kept it for an individual shot, because it wasn't both of them, it was just one of them, and you can totally see that the face is completely CGI'd and fake. I noticed that. I thought I noticed it the first time, but the second time I paid more attention. I was like, yeah, it's completely CGI'd, and I don't think it really needed to be, because it was just one shot. It only showed one Barry Allen anyway. So there's that. So that was a negative thing there. And then the other thing, this is another thing that I mentioned, the non-spoiler one, is the younger Barry Allen character, Ezra Miller's portrayal. Now, I'm not necessarily blaming Ezra Miller for this performance. Obviously, this character was written this particular way, but it is a negative. I think he was obnoxious. He was annoying. Yes, he was supposed to be, and I understand that, but I didn't really like his character, and he was kind of annoying, as it was supposed to be. So I just needed to bring that up in there, because that was something that I wanted to mention. Let's see if there's anything else here. So again, that was the spoiler review of The Flash. Just explained a few things that I couldn't explain in my non-spoiler review of The Flash. Overall, I really did like The Flash. So I really did like it. It's a lot of fun. It's very entertaining, despite its CGI fiasco, whether it's intended or not. They definitely could have fixed that, or should have taken a different direction with that. But overall, I did really like the movie, and I've seen it twice already, and I really enjoyed it. And I hope you guys, if you haven't seen this, or if you did see it, I hope you did like it. I guess I understand that the CGI kind of takes you out of things, and it may just be a deal breaker for you. But yeah, ultimately I did like the story. I like Ezra Miller. He carried the film just perfectly fine. I like Keaton, I like Affleck, I like all the cameos. A lot of the CGI was good, except the baby ones and all the other ones that are quote unquote intentional or whatever. So there you go. So that was my spoiler review of The Flash.